Everything changed overnight. Millions of American gun owners woke up to a news alert that sent shockwaves across the country. The Supreme Court had issued an emergency order, one that experts are calling the most significant blow to the Second Amendment in decades. Social media exploded, legal analysts scrambled for answers, and citizens everywhere began asking one chilling question: what does this mean for our right to bear arms? The alert was short, clinical, and devastating in its implications, but it arrived with the force of a thunderclap. An emergency order, effective immediately, altering the way courts should evaluate gun regulations. For many, that felt like the law itself had been rewritten in the dead of night. In the middle of the night, without the fanfare of a press conference or public debate, the Supreme Court released language that instantly shifted the balance between individual rights and public safety. This was not a slow, careful ruling after lengthy oral arguments. It was a snap decision that carried immediate force. People asked how such a monumental change could come through an emergency order rather than through the standard, more transparent decision-making process. They wondered whether a single sentence in a judicial order could really have the power to reshape constitutional protections that generations had argued over and tested in courtrooms for years. The truth is, emergency orders are powerful tools, and when wielded on a constitutional question as contentious as the Second Amendment, they can produce far-reaching, sometimes irreversible consequences. The emergency order did not, in plain terms, ban guns outright. Instead, it altered the legal framework judges must use when assessing gun laws. For years, courts have applied a rigorous standard that tilted in favor of protecting individual firearm rights, a high bar for any law that sought to limit access to weapons. That standard required lawmakers to provide compelling evidence that a regulation was narrowly tailored to achieve an overwhelmingly important public interest. The new guidance from the Supreme Court lowered that bar, allowing legislators and regulators considerably more room to justify restrictions in the name of public safety. On paper, this looks like an adjustment in legal tests. In practice, it may spell a dramatic expansion of state and local power to curtail gun ownership in ways that were previously thought unconstitutional. The timing of the order only added to the drama. With elections looming and political temperatures already high, this judicial move became instant campaign fodder. One side immediately framed it as judicial overreach, a dangerous example of 9 unelected justices reshaping the law without accountability. The other side hailed it as a courageous step toward reducing the bloodshed that has haunted America for decades. But beyond the partisan headlines, ordinary people felt the emotional weight. Gun owners who view firearms as essential for self-defense, sport, or tradition felt blindsided. They spoke of betrayal and fear, worrying that the rules they had relied on their whole adult lives were suddenly in flux. Parents, too, were unsettled. Would schools, places of worship, and community centers soon see new rules? Would permits and background checks change overnight? The uncertainty reached into the practical, everyday decisions families make. Legal scholars rushed to parse the exact language, looking for both limits and openings. Some found comfort in technicalities. Emergency orders can be temporary, and the full court could later hear arguments and issue a more measured ruling. Others were less optimistic, noting that once lower courts begin applying the new standard, legislation could be enacted and enforced before a full review is possible. The real danger, critics warned, is precedent. A one-time emergency intervention might be used again to justify sweeping constitutional reinterpretations, making the court a lightning rod for instantaneous legal change. If that pattern takes hold, it could change how democracy functions, not by legislation passed through elected representatives, but by judicial fiat in moments of crisis. Across the country, state legislatures and city councils started to move. Some lawmakers, anticipating new leeway, openly discussed drafting stricter regulations on certain types of firearms, higher age requirements, or expanded permitting procedures. Other elected officials promised to defend gun rights, vowing legal challenges and emergency appeals. The patchwork of state laws that already confuses many Americans may become even more complicated as governors and attorneys general choose opposing strategies to respond. For gun owners who travel or move across state lines, the result could be a confusing maze of rules that shift rapidly, depending on where they live and which court rulings are applied in their jurisdiction. Advocacy groups on both sides mobilized immediately. National gun rights organizations pledged to file lawsuits and rally supporters to the cause, arguing that the emergency order threatened liberties enshrined in the Constitution. Grassroots gun safety groups, by contrast, saw an opportunity to push for long-sought reforms at the state level. Fundraising appeals and phone banks surged as both sides sought to shape public opinion and the legal landscape. The intensity of the reaction revealed that this issue is not only legal or policy-based, it's deeply cultural. For some communities, gun ownership is tied to identity and heritage. For others, it's tied to trauma and loss. The emergency order amplified those tensions and forced them into the national spotlight. Media coverage raced to keep up with the legal minutiae, but headlines alone could not capture the human dimension. Families in small towns with deep hunting traditions worried about being criminalized for practices passed down through generations. People in urban neighborhoods where gun violence has been a daily fear wondered whether new rules could finally bring relief and safer streets. Veterans, hunters, collectors, and parents all read the same court language and interpreted it through the lens of their lived experiences. In that way, the story transcended politics. It became a conversation about safety, responsibility, and how a society balances individual liberty with collective protection. Political leaders reacted as well, and their words mattered. The president called for calm and respect for the judicial process, but also urged Congress to engage in honest debate about common-sense measures. Several senators and representatives announced plans for emergency hearings and proposed legislation aimed at clarifying the law. State attorneys general filed competing briefs and emergency motions, setting the stage for a cascade of litigation that could ultimately return the issue to the Supreme Court for a definitive ruling. For ordinary citizens, watching elected officials scramble offered a reminder that the Constitution's meaning is not static, but continually contested in courtrooms, legislatures, and town halls. Behind the legal filings and TV punditry, the longer-term consequences began to emerge. If courts uphold the new standard, law enforcement agencies might receive greater authority to enforce stricter rules. Gun manufacturers and retailers could face new compliance costs and changing markets. Insurance companies might reassess liability exposures. And perhaps most importantly, public attitudes about guns and safety could shift as new norms develop. Laws, after all, do more than punish. They signal what behaviors a society deems acceptable. A judicial change that lets more restrictions stand could, over time, change cultural expectations about firearms in public life. Amid the chaos, some voices urged a different approach. Use this moment to build consensus rather than deepen division. Community leaders, clergy, and local organizers called for listening sessions, tempering rhetoric, and focusing on practical policies that respect rights while reducing harm. Things like better mental health services, improved background checks that respect due process, and targeted measures to keep weapons from those who are demonstrably dangerous. Whether that compromise is possible remains uncertain, but for many it offers the only realistic path forward in a fractured political climate. As the nation digests the implications of that emergency order, one question looms largest. What does this say about the balance of power in America? The Constitution endures because it can adapt, but that adaptability is supposed to come through reasoned debate, not sudden judicial moves that bypass public participation. Whatever the legal outcome in courts to come, this moment is a reminder that rights are not merely legal abstractions. They are lived commitments that require constant vigilance and civic engagement. For gun owners, policymakers, and citizens of all stripes, the next steps will matter. Will the nation find a path that protects both safety and liberty, or will the emergency order mark the start of a new era of judicial change that reshapes rights overnight? Only time, litigation, and the public will tell. If you've made it this far, then you already know how powerful and unpredictable this moment truly is. The Supreme Court's emergency order isn't just a headline. It's a turning point in American history. What happens next will depend on how informed and engaged people like you choose to be. That's why your voice matters more than ever. Don't just scroll past this story. Be part of the conversation that decides where this country goes from here. If you believe people deserve to know the truth behind these sudden legal shifts, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next update. Every week, we dig deeper into stories that mainstream outlets glance over. The rulings, the politics, the quiet moves behind the scenes that change everyday lives. And trust me, what's coming next after this Supreme Court decision will shape everything from gun rights to personal freedom. Drop a comment below with your honest thoughts. Do you think the Supreme Court made the right call, or do you see this as government overreach? Let's hear your voice, because these discussions are how we keep the truth alive. And if you found this video eye-opening or worth sharing, hit the like button. It helps this message reach more people who need to understand what's really happening. Stay alert, stay informed, and remember, in times like these,